And we're live. There we go. All right. So, Chris, thanks for joining.
Good to be here.
Yes, we're getting somebody posting us. Let me copy the new link. And
Be here.
yes, we're getting somebody posting us. Let me copy the new link. Wow, I'm live from two places.
Never worked with live technology and animals.
Two places. Okay. Got a bit of a delay here. Now we got folks joining.
Live technology and animals.
Two places. Here we go. Okay. Got a bit of a delay here. Now we got folks joining. All right. We're ready to go. There we go. All right. I'll monitor the chat here, Chris, so you can sort of do a quick intro. Folks, we're ready to go. Mike, super psyched here to introduce Chris Topman. Chris is definitely has achieved some phenomenal things in VC circles, has a fund, and that has really done incredible things. But it's really more Chris and what he brings to the table and his perspective and his just wit and intelligence and insight. Chris, tell the folks about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Brilliant to be here. Married, 4 kids, 56, going on 16 years old. Forever young. I left school at 16, hustled my way into a trading position or running the floors of the Life and Open Outcry, Life and traded options at the London Stock Exchange back in the 80s. And but ultimately, I felt like as a young kid, I wanted to run my own companies. And so I did a couple of boot camps in marketing and sales and then left the city and then started companies. And, so I've been on that journey of kind of creating products or services and taking them out and selling them to companies and B2Bs for the last 30 odd years. And yeah, today my day job is I invest capital in early stage technology businesses. But I'm a creative entrepreneurial person that's got a constant itch that needs to kind of create, collaborate, and work with people to try and, help them build some of the best companies that they can at that point in time in their career. So good to be here.
Yeah, phenomenal. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. And so, Chris, we have something very special for folks today. And so we had started talking about pivots and that notion that when a company starts, they might have a notion, a vision, an idea, but what they ultimately become successful for can really be miles from what they started out as. And you just had shared these incredible stories that I just wanted you to share with the folks here. They're just unbelievable, and just how far those companies came.
Yeah, I think in the planning call, we talked about 2 opportunities. I think and the good thing about the 2 opportunities is that they talk about 2 different ways of trying to figure out, what is the company that we potentially can become, and how might we bridge from where we are today to this bigger version of the world, where we're helping increasingly more companies. And so I was lucky enough that a couple of my closest friends were building the IP networks, so the internet networks in the early 90s, and then people and companies were joining those. They had an ISP, and they'd won. This was a proposition to SME, so consumer was free, enterprise was being looked after by like the telco, so that would be British Telecom or Cable and Wireless over here in the UK, Verizon, etc. over in the US. And so they had an SME mid-market proposition connecting companies to the internet, and they'd won Internet Product of the Year because this was a team of people that are really good at bundling technology. So at the time, you'd be digging up roads and connecting buildings using actual cables. This is fascinating. When I talk to young people and I say the first 2 meg, that's not a mistake, lease line that we sold, an internet connectivity to a company, it cost £200,000 a year for 2 meg in 95, right? Unbelievable. So, so companies at this time is sometimes, the modern bicycle is really easy for us to understand, but not before the modern bicycle was invented. Those people, riding those penny farthings, they can't really understand the future of the future bicycle. And it's the same. So when I go back and say like companies were struggling with connecting a local area network within their building, which is, connecting PCs together and connecting that to the outside world, it's very hard for the younger generation to kind of understand what that means, let alone paying 200K a year for 2 meg, right? And so that's for the state of the market. And we bundled this technology so somebody could just really plug in this box that had a mail server and some security and some web space all in it. It was super easy. And this was flying off the shelves like hotcakes. So we had this tremendously successful company. But similarly, this is a really, really entrepreneurial group of founders. And instead of this is one of the kind of first key lessons. What we find at Notion now is like the difference between some of the good founders and the great founders is the great founders, they don't try to prove themselves right to the end of the world. They've got an idea and they take it to market, and they don't spend their time trying to prove that original idea is the killer idea, even if it's being bought by customers. What they do is they constantly in discovery mode. So they will constantly be asking questions about what are the problems that keep you awake at night, Mr. Customer? What is it that users are actually doing? And so we were doing a lot of research with these customers, the early adopters to the internet that were our customers. And 3 or 4 things started to come up. And one was some more sophisticated technology around websites. One was to start to black and white list certain sites that in the early advent of the internet weren't really great for their employees to be exposed to. And third on the list was literally like customer language. You keep delivering us viruses. So it was really interesting. There were 2 things that were happening. Is we could see that the engineers, just through their body language, in a creative process, so a different type of process, a creative process, it's very interesting to observe how energy moves around. And so I could see the engineers really itching to get to the third thing on the list, this thing about us delivering viruses to our customers. And the second thing is that this was the third thing on the list. It wasn't the first thing. It wasn't the obvious thing. But one of the founders said, hey, is this a little bit like clean water? Back in the day before there was critical infrastructure in countries, how did you get clean water? You're boiling water and so on and so forth. But now that's all done centrally. That's what the internet is. You have all this processing power. So because we're responsible for delivering the mail to our customers, should we be responsible for cleaning it? What does that do for our business? Is that a good idea? So we decided to back that idea, and we created an alpha, which took a few months, and then we switched this technology on. So we could shift traffic, our customers' traffic. We were young in the day. In this day, we didn't ask their permission, so we moved their traffic through this security tower that we'd built. And one of the engineers had decided that he'd put a bell on it, so that every time we caught something nasty, the bell went off. So when we switched it on, a shriek emitted out of the terminal, and we didn't know what it was, and it was horrendous. So we kind of switched the terminal off, and then the poor engineer realized it was his fault. And the point is that every millisecond we were catching something bad. I mean, we knew immediately that we'd hit this, if you like, internet oil. This was a real gusher of a proof point. And so that then created a course of events where we had to internalize, what do we do about this? Because every email user in the world has this problem. Is it B2B? Is it B2C? And ultimately, we created an entirely new company on the back of that, which then became the largest generation one SaaS business in Europe. So, we went to 150 million of revenue in our annual recurring revenue within about 8 years with that business, and sold that to Semantic. But it came from that process of don't when you're with customers, don't sell your technology, have it sold and do that, have a process for that, but then also spend a significant amount of time in exploration mode, really asking deeper level questions of people around what's keeping them awake at night, what are their key priorities, what's stopping them, disenabling them to be successful, how do they lose against competitors, and you can find an incredible amount of opportunity that may be far bigger than the original idea or the company that you already have. I fundamentally believe that if you're doing a really, really great job for customers, then you have 2 or 3 businesses that you could probably build on the back of that insider, if you like, and understanding or expertise. So.
That's phenomenal, Chris. I'm just monitoring the chat, seeing what's happening here, and that particular story. I mean, I think the 2 bullets, that you really just hit, Chris. I don't think you can repeat these often enough, and across the breadth and depth of startups that you've worked with, just that ability to see what's really gaining traction, and the fact that you say it's not just a single product, it can really be multiple products depending upon the different ways that people are using it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's really as a mindset. We have a thing about like how obsessed our founders or product managers around the problems that their customers have, or the users have, or the industry that they predominantly serve. And I mean, it's really a gold mine. Once you gain that mindset and you invest in the processes of really exploring what's going on. I mean, at the end of the day, your customers, when we do marketing and it's like, we're mid-market, we do these verticals between these employees and those employees, all of the normal sort of stuff. But there are a whole host of other things around, how real human beings are buying technology every day. There are things that they're genuinely deeply frustrated, stuff where they expend huge amounts of their team's time. And sometimes it's in those real business, the real business issues that founders and product managers miss those opportunities because they're just not asking the right questions. Not in that they don't keep that curious mind, maybe because they're selling and marketing their product rather than in exploration mode. So being really obsessed with the pain of the environment that within they're serving, that they're selling to, that they're supporting, whether that's buyers, whether that's users, whether that's the industry. I mean, that's where the gold mine is, I think.
Yeah, it's fantastic, Chris. And just to toss this wrench into the conversation, Chris, we did get a question about then once you're starting to see traction, how do you then drive product market fit or securing pre-seed before with the purpose of driving experiments to get to PMF?
Yeah, I mean, it's the silver bullet question. It's like, hey, how do we get product market fit? We all argue about, well, what is product market fit? Obviously, it's not something that's particularly stable. Right. I think in the current context, it's maybe not something that lives as long as it used to. So, for example, the hype cycle of establishing product market fit, gaining traction, and then losing product market fit, that cycle theoretically is happening faster. So I think we have a common phrase in Notion, which is like uncomfortably narrow. There's a paradox state between when you're pitching, because there's an investor part of this question, right? Is that you're pitching to VCs, and depending on the VC that you're pitching to or the investors, then the size of the market, i.e. the size of the problem that you can solve, is important because it's the way that investors ultimately decide whether they can or cannot make a return. So, for example, the larger the fund, the larger the market size needs to be, right? The smaller the fund, or if it's an angel investor of a certain type, then the size of the market and the size of the problem can be smaller because they can sell companies at a smaller value and still make money. So the first thing is to remind ourselves that if you're pitching to investors, you're not pitching the product. First of all, the founder is the pitch. The second thing is that really what you're selling is the investment proposition. An investor ultimately is driven to deploy capital and return that capital to their investors within a certain period of time. And so it's how do they make a significant return? So a lot of pitching is people make the mistake that they're talking about their product. Many investors aren't actually interested in the product. They're interested in the problem that's being solved and how you as an insider have an insider's track on how to solve that problem in a significantly way. And a lot of that market's going to move over and adopt your way of trading at some point in the future in order for them to make a lot of money on that investment. So, but I think that's a too big a topic. In terms of product market fit, I refer to like uncomfortably narrow. So whereas investors want to see a big TAM or SAM or SOM, and the definitions I publish are quite frequently, if you want to be sort of hyper efficient and use capital really wisely, then the smaller the market definition that you're going to deploy your resources to go and win. So you're going to create demand. You're going to support that demand with sales efforts, whether that's PLG or whether that's with enterprise sales or any other sales motion or variant of that. Then if you've got a very, very small market definition, then it's easy to market to that definition. If you have a very wide, we're enterprise, we're SME, we're global, we do ERP and we do accounting, that then becomes very, 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 very difficult to market to. So it's not an easy conundrum. But if you want to drive traction both quickly and efficiently, then first of all you have to solve the first thing that we talked about at the beginning of the call. You've got to find a very large pressing pain, as I would say, a pain that someone's banging the desk to solve, one that makes them think, if I don't solve this, I might get fired. If we don't have an answer by the next board meeting, we've got real issues, and that's the first challenge, is finding that problem. The second part of the problem is finding a solution to that problem. And the easiest way to think about it is like, is it easy to buy? Is it easy to implement? Is the speed to value very quick? So I get my ROI from doing that super quickly. And is it really hard to get rid of? If you can start to sort of tick those boxes, and clearly not all technologies, deep tech, etc., things of an extreme enterprise nature, they're quite often not easy to buy. They're not easy to implement. But to keep it, the easier it is to buy and the easier it is to implement, the faster it is that you get value, then the more attractive that can be for investors. And the more efficient, the lower amount of money that you need to spend on the cost of acquisition to gain a customer. So, the 90% of companies will not find product market fit. They're in a sort of what I would call the discovery period, right? They're constantly looking and figuring out how do they discover, the flywheel between finding a problem and a solution that fits, that's sufficiently big enough that that buyer and all of their peers start to think, this is the new way we're going to do business. This is the new way we're going to trade. This is the new way that we're going to get customers to our website. This is the new way that we're going to run our analytics. This is the new way we're going to install customers, et cetera, et cetera. So, once you've got them, the risk profile changes significantly when you get product market fit, and it's at that point where the amount of investors that are available that will kind of compete to invest in you, starts to go up significantly.
Fantastic. So let's talk about another pivot, Chris, that I really felt was quite compelling. And this is the humorously named Triptease. What can you tell us about where they started and where they ended up?
Yeah, trip teasers are super interesting. So this was the early advent of social channels. It would have been about 2013, I think. And this is in the hotel space. I love this founder still today. I mean, just an incredible founder, super bright, runs multiple companies. And him and two other co-founders, they came to the idea that wouldn't it be great if hotel brands could use when people are checking in and checking out to use user-generated content, which was a theme at the time, and they could provide them with a postcard of their stay, and they could then post that on their social media channels. My first meeting with this founder was actually in a beautiful London Square, the sort of thing you'd see like on the film Notting Hill. And I like to sort of do walking meetings, and I mean, he was really, really compelling, but I really didn't like the proposition. I was thinking of the loop between, okay, I'm checking in and I'm checking out. And let's say I did this thing, and let's say I put it on these really powerful new things called these social media channels. And let's say I'm some other random person that sees this within this person's network. Am I likely then to want to go to that city, that town, that holiday destination? So it all felt a little bit weak. It felt too far away from a transaction for me. But the founder was really, really compelling. And there were some things that he said in the walk that was intriguing, is that the online booking agents, so what is, like booking.com, Kayak, etc., they were starting to pick up significant percentages of the booking revenue. And as a business person, this really sort of vexed me. As I was walking back, I'm thinking, put yourself in the position of a young entrepreneur in the hotel space. You've financed the building of a hotel. You've spent millions of dollars fitting it out. You've got this incredible workforce that you've got. You've put them into this hotel, and you open up your hotel and you haven't even taken $1 in revenue yet, right? And then you fill up your house. So the CAC payback on a hotel, I don't know what it must be, but it's got to be 3 to 4 years. And then you get your repeat purchasing and so on and so forth. And then to think that like 15 to 20% of all of the revenue goes to like a digital booking engine, I was thinking that there was something in there. So this is another way of trying to figure out a pivot. And so we invited them into the office, and this is where I do sort of like whiteboard sessions, which is, quite process orientated, but it involves quite a lot of trial and error, questioning, creativity. I have a bit of dyslexia, so I can think outside of the box, very, very naturally. And what we do is we map out the whole value chain of an industry. And then we start to run things across the top. So this might be the journey that you might go through if you're going to book a holiday, right? And so we started to look at where the time goes and where the money goes. And what was very interesting is they came with some analysis that if you're a small hotel where you had no purchasing power, booking engines were taking over, at the time, it was over 30-40% of the booking revenue. And if you were a big, number one hotel chain, it would have been like 15 to 20%. But the numbers were getting worse every year. So, i.e., the booking engines were taking more power. Now, as investors, we like that. So I'd be looking at the booking end, thinking, wow, that's an interesting business because it has, it's a price giver, not a price taker. The small hotel was a price taker. I'll take the order. I'll pay you the commission. Now, what we managed to map out on this whiteboard were all the participants within this industry and where the money was going. And what was interesting is the consumer would take 40 days on average to book a hotel. They would have the OTA, the booking engine website up, but they would also have the hotel website up. They did some customer research. So they did B2B research and B2C research between two of these whiteboard sessions over a couple of weeks. And 65% of consumers had the hotel website because they had better photographs, they had more detail, they felt more kinship with the hotel itself. For some strange, maybe it was a human reason, we weren't really sure. But also 65% thought that the OTA booking engine was cheaper. Now, the analysis of that wasn't necessarily true. And also the hotel could dynamically price against what was being offered online. So they conceived a product whereby on the hotel website, they would have a pop-up that gave 3 OTAs pricing and the hotel pricing that was never more than the 3 OTAs. That was their initial product concept. So I gave them £250,000 to go build that product. And we launched it 3 months later, and it went wildfire because the pent-up demand to try and drive consumers to book on the direct website was so high in hotels. I think in the first 2 months we sold to like 250, 350 hotels. And within a couple of years we had, about 1,000 of the mid-market. There are 8 massive groups. They called them the Mighty 8, and we had 2 of those. Now, the technology itself wasn't thick enough. It wasn't deep enough. There wasn't a big enough moat. So we knew that we didn't have to worry about pricing. We had to drive the price of the product down to create more demand, more buyers, and then we had to create more sophistication in the product. But it was so interesting to see going through that process again of mapping out the whole industry, 3 or 4, 5 different minds all working on well, what about this? If this is true, is that true? Doing the analysis purely in pursuit of looking for a big enough problem and trying to conceive a product that might be able to solve what we felt was the biggest, most pressing problem for the industry, for those buyers. And, and to their credit, they did it. That's I don't know what, but probably it's about a 20 million revenue business today. And looks after the, most of the biggest hotels on the planet. And, it was a brilliant experience to sort of go through that unlock where you feel like you've got the answer to a great problem, but you're not too sure. But then when you launch the product, it gets incredibly well received. Now, of course, I've had a lot of duds. I've gone through exactly the same process and flamed out on the first product. But it's the methodology. The methodology works.
Yeah, no, it's great, Chris. And I shared your link. You shared something earlier, and then I also included a link back to your TAM and SOM paradox. And I have both of these links in the chat so folks can refer to this recent thought leadership that you have. I think is very relevant and supportive of this whole concept of creating something, getting it out there, and then iterating it based on what you get from the market. And I think this process that you went through, mapping the user journey in terms of time and revenue, is huge. Absolutely. Well, actually, money first. The revenue comes later if you get the other pieces right.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think every person, nearly every person in a business has some serious problems. And the challenge is forgetting the fact that the problem that they have is they're not necessarily open enough to tell you, right? So if you take the first methodology that we talked about, and then you talk to the second methodology that we referred to, it's incumbent on the product manager, the entrepreneur, the founder, to get into the mindset of getting into the mind of the people. And this is not selling to them. This isn't proving my idea. A lot of people go in and they evangelize their idea. I had a founder who I actually had dinner with a couple of weeks ago, who ultimately, wasn't successful. The company then did go on to be successful and a company that we exited. But he was just brilliant. He was so brilliant. He was from an e-commerce background. He was selling to big retailers with big online presence, and he would sit down with people and he would basically give them this vision of the future. And I would sit there after talking to him and I would say, listen, do you know what happens when you leave the room? And he said, what do you mean what happens when I leave? When you leave the room, they're going to go down to the the kitchen, the company kitchen, and they're going to be chatting to a colleague, and they go, "Oh, who was that guy you were talking to?" And they're saying, "Oh my God, this is this most brilliant guy that I'm talking to, who's such and such, and he's got this great vision of the future and stuff like that. I hope he does really, really, really well with it. But I've got this really pressing project that if I don't get fixed, I might get fired." Do you know what I mean? So he would miss the opportunity to really, really understand what's going on in the minds of the people that are, running the company, making decisions, of the people that he would be selling to, if you see what I mean. So, and it's such an important lesson. It's such an important skill to, and we're all guilty of it. We get an idea and we're like, "Hey, this is what I'm doing, and this is where it's going, and it could really work like this, and it could work in this circumstance or that circumstance," if you see what I mean. But I think if you map out the market, you map out the key constituents within that market, you start to take a completely different approach to asking, deeper level specific questions, and trying to understand how they're feeling about a particular problem, how they're addressing it, what experience that they've got of different ways of solving that problem. Is anyone else solving it in a different way, or is it solvable at all? If you get in the habit of doing that, you're going to start to find opportunity all over the place.
Yeah. And I think that's a nice sort of yes and at the tail end of what you're saying. You see these opportunities just by getting out there and starting something. You see these opportunities where you can take something in several potential directions, right?
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to that, the great founders versus the best founders. Is the great founders that, they don't over-index on trying to convince the world that they were right, that what they over-indexed in is trying to find a problem within the world that they're heading into, and figuring out, is there something that's ultimately much more significant that they can address? And then when they find that problem, then it's a kind of, how are we then going to address that in a way that's kind of 10, 100x more economically viable for that buyer, that then creates this whole wave of adoption. If you think about it, the bigger the pain, the bigger the wave, right? People talk about, is it a painkiller or a vitamin? But, the way I think about it is like, just finding things that are just so significantly painful that need to get solved, and that's when you can get off to the races, and that's when the new challenges start.
Right, you're just constantly trading one set of challenges for another, right?
Yeah. Just we got the idea, then we get to product market fit, and then it goes to like, okay, can we start the initial highly repeatable scale, and then can we expand on highly repeatable scale to creating deeper reach into our customers. So we're selling more things to existing customers, or the same thing to new markets, and you get into that kind of that model of same product, new market, new product, existing customer, and so on and so forth. So but from those building blocks, it's just impossible without finding a pain that's sufficiently big enough to solve, right? And then doing that in a way where customers will reward you like so much if you really, really, really delight them. I mean, technology's moved in my career, which is like over 30 years. No, it's 30 years. And like I said, I started at 16. And so technology always was like, we always used to say in the 90s, it's like so many technologies overpromise and underdeliver. And so if you really build products, design for your products that they can love, they reward you so much. And we have this, whether you measure it in net promoter score, or like, we just think about it as that power of, word of mouth marketing. it's so much more important. It's so much scalable, so much more efficient, so much more of a happier life. If you've got a handful of customers who you just think, I can't believe that you look after me. It's a human thing, right? In many ways, the technology gets in the way of the human bit. It's like, I can't believe that I get looked after by this company in the way that I get looked after. And then what do? They tell people about it. And there are, so I quite often do these things where, like, as a angel investor, I invest in a thing called a super niche, where the TAM is so small, it's just not for VCs. But I love the founder. They have an insider understanding around a particular niche. The thing about small markets where they get underinvested is that if a founder really finds a hot seam of gold in that small market, then those customers can't believe how they've enabled a technology to look after them in such a way, because the technology that they're currently using isn't designed for them, right? It's designed for bigger customers, or it's designed horizontally, right? It's a horizontal ERP or a horizontal accounting product. Whereas as soon as, and I think in the AI window, this is super exciting because you can create all sorts of tiny adaptations to your product that is very specific to a tiny audience. And so your ability to address that audience, as we said at the beginning, if you've only got 100 people to sell to, and I'm not saying that's a perfect market size, right? Then it's very quickly to figure out whether you've got a winner or a loser, because you've only got to find a way to make 100 calls if you can get 100 phone numbers to the 100 people that you're selling to. But the thing about really small, highly niche products that are nuanced specifically to that niche is normally they're incredibly capital efficient. And I've made a few bets with this thesis as an angel, and they might raise $500,000 or $1 million, and that's it. They're done. Then they've got an audience that is really, really committed to them. The vast majority of their acquisition is word of mouth. They don't need to raise any more capital. They own the majority of the cap table, and so I think this AI era is going to be pretty good for people to be able to run those kind of models in the future.
Yeah, very quickly spin something up that's viable, get enough revenue to be able to scale it, and then potentially exit, right? And then, as an angel, I think that's a good model for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, as an angel, I work on the basis that I'm going to lose most of my money most of the time. But it's the blowout successes that, make Mrs. T happy, that I'm not wasting most of my money most of the time.
Yeah, I read that stat in American basketball. I think Michael Jordan and LeBron James have missed the most shots. They have set the records for missing the most shots. But then, of course, they have also set the records for being among the most famous sports people in the world, in the history of sport, in their sports, the way they've excelled by taking those shots. And I think that's very analogous to being a VC, right?
Yeah, the most successful VCs typically have the highest flame out rate as well, so the most total deaths. So because I think one of the challenges in the sort of open or generalized market is people forget that VC is an extremely niche product, and it's a product that is not a good product for 99% of the market, and so it thrives on, well, in the sort of classic high tech software type VC rather than less necessarily deep tech or later stage PE venture capital. But in early stage, the model really works. You either do early stage, 100 bets and double down on two, treble down on two, or to give you an example, we would process at Notion something like 3,000 to 4,000 deals a year, and we'll do a fund will take 3 years in the investment period, and we'll make 20 material bets, around at or around product market fit, Series A, B. And we will make almost all of our money over a 12, 13, 14-year period from 3 of those bets. So we've seen 9,000 companies, and so and we've made 20 material bets, and so so it's we're losing most of the time, and so I mean it's thought provoking from our founders' perspective. Of course, they've they want to raise capital. They want to get money that enables them to invest in their product on the mission that they're on. And they just it's really important to have the right people around them that kind of understand how the market works, I think. So
yeah, no, that's amazing. And I think just to sort of close the loop on the pivot piece, how many would you say of the companies that you funded and those that pivoted to success versus those that decided not to pivot and did not have success, what would you say that ratio is?
I don't know. I don't have the numbers, but I think pivoting is an outcome from a force mechanism, right? It's saying, look, this isn't working. We need to figure out something else. And sometimes something that you're already doing is that it becomes the new product, right? Like
Right.
Slack would be an example. I think Twitter is an example. Sometimes it comes from deep discovery, as the examples that we gave earlier, the 2 case studies earlier in the call. But I think the mental approach of always having deep discovery going on, and the mapping approach is universal. So it's rare that you have a single value proposition that carries you through the 5, 10, 15-year journey as a technology company. Normally, we're operating in extremely dynamic markets with alternative competitive threats, and so that kind of innovation cycle is ever constant. So, in building our company, or the company that I mentioned earlier on the call, our mentality was always that we have to reinvent the company every 18 months. And when we sold, we had 20,000 corporate companies. We had a couple of hundred people in the US. We had 650 globally, so all around the world, but 350 maybe in the UK. We had seven products. 2.5 of them were pretty significant. The others less so, but helped us with winning. But did customers really use it? Did it really transform them? Not really, but we probably wouldn't have done without them. So we were carrying the cost of the product, but we weren't, and we were getting the benefit of holding our market position. But it wasn't significant from a revenue. So there's a whole number of reasons as to why you innovate. So we had to go from a single product to multi-product. We had to go from UK SMB to enterprise. We had to go from UK SMB enterprise and 2 products to the US, continental Europe, Asia. So you have to do all of these things, and you find that you have product related issues, market understanding related issues, go to market as in channel related issues, all the way. The US were more indirect than the UK. We were so dominant in the UK. We were probably the number 2 in the US, and we had 2 competitors in the US. So all of these things you're having to constantly synthesize to continue to grow super quickly, and fend off your competition, and keep your team happy, because they love winning, right? As I say, this the number 1 drug in in the company is that we're winning. Every year, people don't just give up their markets to you. It's such an incredibly dynamic market that we all operate in. It's probably as dynamic today as it ever has been, and in a way, that's kind of why we love it. Why we love it, because just like you were saying about the basketball players, right? When you get 2 or 3 great era of players, whether that's in tennis or football or soccer in the US, American football, then those great players, when they're in the same era, they bring out more of themselves, which is great for the customer, right? Because then innovation is faster. So I know sometimes the sales and marketing folks, and maybe even the finance folks, might say, "Hey, why can't we get a clear run of this?" I remember one of our CEOs once apologized to the entire sales team that we finally got some competition. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's phenomenal. The competition does allow customers to win and does encourage each other to become better and produce greater customer delight in new and different ways.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And I can tell you that the iPhone definitely improved when Android really stepped up and started to introduce a number of very incredible features, which are just pretty much lock, stock, and barrel, just brought over to the iPhone straight from Android. And I think vice versa, right? They informed each other and making these phones just much easier, more enjoyable to work with.
Now, on the planning call, I think you were talking to me about the pivot experience that you had. Do you want to talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, just really quickly about Loom. One of the things I noticed about Loom, I do quite a bit of work with Atlassian, and they had this whole connected workplace play that they were doing. And the Loom had started off initially as a set of connected developer tools. You could trade chunks of code and do pull request reviews and all of this stuff and really do that in an integrated way. And one small part of it was video. And what Atlassian ended up doing, and Loom is doing well, it had a thriving customer base and a lot of people were very passionate about it. But what Atlassian did was solve the problem of meetings. People hate to have meetings. So what Loom did and what Atlassian then acquired it for was async updates. So woven into the entire Atlassian fabric of every product it has, whether it be Jira, Confluence, you name it, you can now find a little video icon, record a short video clip, and then that gives the context. So you don't necessarily have to be great at writing and other things that people have a hard time with. And so you can record this short Loom clip, and then that travels with that work unit and gives people the context they need, and without that person having to be there to speak to that item. And that has been hugely successful for Atlassian. And obviously the Loom team benefited enormously from that. So that is, to me, an astounding version of, well, you have this idea and then you got acquired, not for your idea, but where people were starting to see that traction. And I wrote that up in the deep dive on strategy reverse engineering. So I'll share that link as well for folks.
So that's interesting. That's the sort of it's like a hidden super feature that someone reimagined in an entirely different way, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that story. And
it's a great product.
Yeah. It's actually similar to some of the things that happen in lockdown with COVID with lockdown, is that in parts of our portfolio, there were some buried features that were just like, I was talking about, we had 7 products at Message Labs, but only 2.5 of them were significant. It's very similar. When we had lockdown, then all of a sudden, one of our companies would all of a sudden go ballistic because they had this kind of piece of this, they had this free thing that was in their product stack or feature stack. And then that thing, counting heads in supermarkets or something, using camera technology or something, became like something that people couldn't couldn't live without because they wouldn't be able to open the supermarket if they didn't know what the head count was or something like that. It was unbelievable. Zoom was probably a company that came out of nowhere in terms of its level of scale to where it got to, with the similar conditions change. But whereas it sounds like it was a great tool that was buried as a feature, but then someone saw it as a completely different value proposition, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that was natural, organic customer traction. It's like, never mind the developer tools. It's fantastic. So I can just give you a quick update and you can just watch the video in less than 2 minutes and we're on the same page.
So it's they could see it in the data?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So people were, and I think it wasn't just like the quantitative data, but it's also, I think, when you're early stage and having qualitative data and keeping very close to customers and talking to them about their experience, watching them struggle with the product and seeing how they're actually using it. That's where the real magic happens.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I mean, you've got to have your your tentacle, whatever, your receptacles open, trying to think what's really happening here. What are they using? What does the data say? What are they saying? What are they feeling? Does anyone care anyway?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, and that's the thing. I think there's the vision and mission can be very powerful as a motivating force, Chris, but they can also lead you astray if you don't have, as you say, your receptacles open and listening.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. So I think we're winding down here on the time. It seems like the time has flown by. I learned a tremendous amount. I know we had a pre-call conversation, and I think just taking those ideas, those stories, and running with them, and the way you've expanded on them has been hugely helpful, Chris. And like I said, I'm looking very much forward to sharing the transcript. We'll clean it up for folks and just make sure that they can see the bullets of Chris's wisdom and get that over to both of our audiences.
Listen, it's great. I've had a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's important to understand that, like, inside the hopes and fears and minds of all of these customers and buyers, there's a business there somewhere. There's a problem that's worth solving, and there's a whole bunch of problems that are not worth solving. And go mine for that. I think, hopefully people can strike some gold as they go on that process of discovery. So it's been I've enjoyed the hour. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. And thank you really for taking some time out of your busy day. You're just doing a tremendous amount of incredible thought leadership and then actually on the front lines with these startups. So we're very grateful to have your knowledge and wisdom here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone, for dialing in. I really appreciate it. Happy hunting out there.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thank you. Thanks again. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Chris.